So, how many times, my friends, have you thought to yourself, gee, my stitches just look messy. I wish I knew how to fix that. Well, welcome to NeedleBugg. My name is Karen. Today is February the 1st, 2023. And today we're going to talk about just how you can fix those stitches and have them look nice and neat and hopefully tidy and be happy with them. Now, all that being said, do remember that there are really no rules in cross stitch. The only one is if you are happy with what you are stitching, if you are happy with the way your stitches look, that is fine. There is perfectly nothing wrong with that. We are our own worst enemies, myself included. And there just are days where I say to myself, gosh, your stitches really could look better. Now, do we all stitch to enter into a competition? Is that our main motivation? No, of course not. The things I've entered into Woodlawn and the things I have won awards for in Woodlawn, when I stitched them, I didn't even know of Woodlawn. So therefore, I was not stitching for a competition. I was stitching just the way that made me happy. And that's what you all need to do. But if you'd like some tips and some tricks on how to make those stitches look a bit nicer, that's what we're here today to do. So let's jump in. First off, the first thing that even though the little girls back in the day when we stitched samplers didn't let this bother them at all. Their stitches went willy-nilly, one direction or another. It was however they happened to stitch it. Some crossed the top stitch bottom right to top left. Some crossed the top stitch bottom left to top right, all within the same sampler. It didn't matter to them. They got their piece stitched. However, today, because I think stitching has evolved in many ways, we like to have or suggest that stitches cross all in the same direction. And that's mainly because of the way the light reflects on our stitches. You get a nicer look with them crossed all in the same direction than you do when they're crossed willy-nilly. So let's look at my stitched example of that. Here we go. If you look at a little needle pointer here, if you look at this section, oh, my camera's backwards. Well, I'll be darned. If you look here, these stitches are all crossed. The top one goes bottom right to top left. And I do not know why my camera is backwards today. So please bear with me. This area here, they're crossed willy-nilly. So when you look at that, if you look at the reflection of the light, you can see the difference. Best practice is to cross them all in the same direction. Okay? Now, the other next thing you'd like that is in your best interest to do is, as often as possible, come up in a clean hole versus a dirty hole. And then you go, oh, Karen, what are you talking about? Clean holes and dirty holes. You know, they're all clean to me. I don't see any dirt on here, right? Okay, let me explain a clean hole and a dirty hole. A clean hole is the hole in your fabric that does not have any thread in it at all, or just one time that thread has passed through that hole. Those are considered clean holes. The holes in your fabric that have two threads going down are considered dirty holes. Sometimes there's 3 threads going down and you're putting the 4th one down, okay? So if it has more than 2 threads going through that hole, and I don't mean if you're stitching with 2 threads, those 2 threads. I mean you're stitching with 2 threads, so it would be 2 threads, the 2 threads, that's the second pass. The third pass has 2 threads, and then you're putting the last part of your last X into that hole so that it has 4 times going in that hole. When you have already had 2 times where you pass thread through that hole, and this is going to be the 3rd time, you don't want to come up in that hole. You want to go down in that hole. So when you're stitching, you want to set your stitching up so that you are going down in those holes. Why, you ask? Why does that matter? Well, for all intents and purposes, I guess it really doesn't matter. You can do it either way. However, even though your tapestry needle is a blunt edge, a blunt point, we all know that in our stitching, we have pierced our floss. So if you're coming up in that hole and you happen to pierce a piece of floss that is already in that hole, what you're going to do is drag that end right back up. So then that stitch is going to look loose. Okay. That's the biggest reason why you want to go down in holes that already have thread occupying them, because you don't want stitches to be pulled back out and come loose. Now, oftentimes they're not pulled out a lot, but they are pulled out enough that there is a noticeable difference. I've had that happen to me many times before I let that little tip sink in. And in fact, a friend of mine would look at my stuff and she said, "Oh, but here you have a loose stitch." Well, no, wait, that wasn't loose when I stitched it. What do you mean it's loose? And in fact, it was loose, but I had come up in that hole versus going down. So that's just something, keep that in mind. If you're having trouble with stitches coming loose or stitches looking just a little out of kilter, try just going down in those holes that have 2 and 3 passes already through them. Okay? Mind your tension. Tension is so, so important in keeping your stitching neat. Okay? I think I can show it here on, I'm going to switch screens on you again. Here we go. Bye. Okay. In this sample, and it might be better if I hold it up. In this sample, my stitches are pulled really, really tight. And you can see how they just don't look nice at all. This one, they're not pulled quite as tight. I mean, they're pretty close to normal. Okay. There we go. All right. I don't know why my camera looks a little blurry today. Oh, I don't know. I think I do know. And I'll fix that when we're done, when this part's done. Here, I took a piece of Lugana and pulled the stitches really, really tight. And can you see how there's gaps in here? When you think about that, those of us that do full coverage, especially, do a thing here. I think it's blurry because my camera lens is goobered. There we go. That'll be better. Okay. Those of us that do full coverage and you get column lines or diagonal lines, and it's like, oh, it gets so frustrating that you have the lines. And I don't anyone that is in my for the love of diagonal cross stitching group, this goes back a ways, but there was a woman, um, and she was fine with my sharing this because I even posted her picture, not her picture, but the picture of her stitching in the group. And I think I might have even showed it on one of my earlier videos where she just had column lines all over the place. And a lot of it was due to tension. Because what happens is when you're stitching just 10 stitches wide, let me see if I can show you one here a little bit. Flipping screens again. Okay, here we go. Okay, if you're stitching just 10 stitches wide and here we go. This is, we're going to say this is the 10th stitch. Okay, here we go. And okay, my backwards camera here today is making me a little goobers. I'm going to do it down here. All right. Okay. This is stitch number 10. And if you notice, I'm pulling, or I should say this is stitch number 1 of a 10 column. Okay. So both these portions are being pulled this direction. Okay. Now I'm going to do the 10th stitch on this one. And now both these stitches are going to be pulled this direction, this direction. So what you end up with when you're butting 2 columns against each other is this X, both your top and your bottom leg are pulled this direction. This X, both your top and your bottom leg are pulled this direction if your tension is really tight. Okay, so that's what will cause your column line or your diagonal line. All right. So you want to, that's the reason in at least full coverage stitching that you need to not do a completely straight line. You need to stagger it so that you don't get those lines, number one. And in doing stitching, you're stitching that is not full coverage, you still don't want to pull too tight because then you have like this here where it's just pulled really tight and you get all those holes in between. Well, that's not attractive either. Okay, so be mindful of your tension. Ideally, for me, my rule of thumb is when I'm doing the stitch, I will pull the thread until I meet resistance, and then I stop. Don't pull it harder than that. Pull it until you have that first resistance, and then stop. And it just takes practice. It takes thinking about it, and it takes the repetition of doing that. Okay, but that point of resistance may be different for each person. So find out what it is for you and compare then how your stitches are looking. Okay? So, next thing is limit how far you travel with your thread. Do a lot of traveling, and in some cases, yes, like in full coverage, we travel with our thread and we will be stitching over it. However, when you have an area that is very, very high in confetti and has a lot of colors in there, the more you have traveled threads, the thicker that back becomes, which can cause lumps in your stitching. And a lot of times, okay, maybe washing and pressing can flatten that out again, but depending on how lumpy it is, those lumps may show up when the framer is framing it. So I would be careful how far you travel. The other point in how far you travel is if you're an in-hand stitcher especially, the further you travel, the more tendency you have to not leave enough slack in that thread. So therefore it's going to pull, therefore it's going to extend the hole in your fabric and maybe even cause some, you know, I guess, wrinkling or buckling of the fabric. So you want to be careful how far you travel. Now, thread. I suggest, and again, only a suggestion, your working length ends up to be about 18 inches. More than that, what happens is because of the repetition of going in and out of that fabric, up and down and up and down and in and out, that fabric tends to wear. And my next suggestion is going to explain a little bit of that. Not the fabric, the thread tends to wear. And that's how it gets fuzzy. That's how one of the reasons sometimes it shreds on you. Um, Sometimes it looks a little thinner at places than other places. So 18 inches is standard recommended length of thread. Now, the other thing about your thread, when you're stitching with 2 or more thread, and this also plays into another point in a little bit, is you want to strip your threads first. And you go, what are you talking about? Karen, what in the world is stripping your threads? What do you mean? Okay, I'm going to switch back to my other camera again. We're going back and forth here today. And maybe I'll just stay on this other one. How's that? Okay, let's go this way. Okay, here we have my threads. I actually have 2 6-inch, 6-strand pieces here. So when you strip, you cut your length. You cut your 18-inch length. Okay. To strip your threads, you're going to tap on the end that you pulled from the skein. Okay. And when you tap on this end, do you see how they fluff out? Okay. Now, this is the part that people go, oh my God, it's going to turn into a knotted mess. No, it's not. All right. You take a hold of one strand and you pull. And you see how it is curling up. Yes, it's curling up. Do not worry about that. Because what's going to happen is this. Look at that. It just, all you do is you take your finger and you straighten it back out again. And it has not knotted on you. Okay, so now you want 2 strands. So you do that same thing again. You get a hold of one and you just pull it. Oh my God, it's gonna knot. No, it's not. Just keep pulling and see how it just falls back down. Now what you do, now you don't, if you're doing a loop start, yes, cut your thread 36 inches, fold it in half and make a loop. But if you're using 2 strands that are already cut, now what you want to do is line it up and thread your needle. And you want, when you're stitching, these 2 threads to lay side by side. Okay, so we're going to thread you would thread your needle with these 2 strands together. All right, if you don't do that, okay, let me see. I think this only has, okay, oh, let me pull one more off. Now it has 2. If you don't do that, do you see how this thread is twisted on itself? Okay, you see that? All those little twists in it? So if you don't, let me lay it down here. So there you go. See, it's all twisted. This piece, on the other hand, lays nice and straight and is not twisted. Which one would you rather stitch with to have a neat stitch? Okay, I think you answered your own question. Okay, if you stitch with this one, your stitches are going to look twisted. If you stitch with this one, then your stitches are going to lay that the thread lays side by side. And that's ideal. Ideally, in the perfect world, that's what you want to happen. Again, it's up to you. It's whatever you're happy with. But if you're looking to make neater stitches, this is one way to do it. Okay, so let me see what I covered here. Clean holes, stripping, travel, watch your tension, 18 inches. Now, what also impacts on this is using the correct needle. Remember, I just said a little bit ago about if you use thread that's too long, your thread will fray, get thinner and thinner, and the next thing you know, you're pulling your needle up with a short piece of frayed thread and the rest of your thread's hanging off your work. Okay, or the tail is getting all frayed. That happens because your needle is too small. The rule of thumb is you want to use the needle that accommodates the thickness of your thread. Okay, so you want to use a needle with an eye big enough to accommodate your in this case, 2 strands of floss. So you want the eye, you want 2 strands of floss to be able to easily pass through the eye of the needle. By the same token, you don't want the eye of the needle so big that when it goes through your fabric, it leaves a big hole. You want it to just open the hole enough so that it can the thread can pass easily through the fabric. Now, I know a lot of you love to listen to the sound of thread going through the fabric. And what do they call that? I think they call it, don't ask me what it means, but I think they call it ASMR. And that sound is very relaxing for some people, and they love that sound of the thread coming through the fabric. If that sound is if you hear a pop and then that sound, it's almost I don't to me, it's almost scratchy, okay? So when I hear those video or see those videos where that that needle going through kind of makes a pop sound, and then you can hear the thread dragging through, to me, that says your needle is too small because, pardon me, you don't want to hear a lot of scratchy noise as your thread passes through your fabric. That's what causes your thread to get fuzzy and fray. Okay, again, it's my opinion. I know people love to listen to that, and I get that. However, that's when thread starts to look all fuzzy and funky, and you end up with that needle and a short piece of frayed thread in your hand, and where's the rest of it? Okay, so your needle needs to be large enough to accommodate your strands of floss, however many that may be, and small enough, I guess, is the other way to put it, small enough that it opens the hole in your fabric for the needle and the thread to pass through without scratching against the edge of the fabric all the time. Okay. I know there are people that always use a 28 needle. Always. That's all they ever use. And you know what? I was one of those too, where I always use a 28 needle. But depending on what fabric you're using, a 28 needle is too small and it's not opening the holes of your fabric enough for the thread not to fray. So just keep that in mind. Okay? Now, next. I said, we're already at a half an hour. This could be a long video. So let me just take a sip of coffee here. All this talking makes your mouth dry. The other thing is we separated our threads. Okay, we stripped our threads. We laid them back together so that they lay side by side. And how many of you, as you are stitching, start to get that twist? And the next thing you know, your fabric is twisting, not your fabric, your thread. Pardon me, we're talking about thread here, not fabric. Your thread is twisting upon itself. So you pull your thread through the fabric, and all of a sudden, and it always happens without fail, on the back, you get a knot. Heaven forbid. Now, the one trick is, as soon as you feel that tug that there's a knot, don't continue to pull, because all you're going to do is tighten the knot. Turn your fabric up, turn your piece over. The knot, okay, I'm just going to do a simple slip knot here, okay? But your knot usually has the loop of the knot, okay? So if I continue to pull, that is going to tighten. But if I just take a hold of this knot part, pull up on this, I will be able to just slip that knot right off, but you can't have it pulled tight. But all you do is pull your thread out till both ends underneath the knot are even. Take a hold of the loop of the knot, right? I take a hold of it right at the knot, and I can usually just pull that knot right off 9 times out of 10. If it isn't one of those knots that not only did it loop on itself, but it looped and looped and looped, then, well, then you have to fuss a little bit. But when your thread starts to get really twisted like that, then it's time to untwist. You can untwist by letting your needle drop and let that fabric, let that thread dangle until it is untwisted. Or what a lot of people do is as they're stitching, because what we tend to do is you go down through the fabric. If you're a sticker and a stabber, like I am, I still have not perfected the sewing method that it looks nice to me. You go down through the fabric. As you're turning to come back up, you tend to just put that tiny little twist on your needle. That's what's causing your thread to curl up on itself eventually if you don't straighten it out. What many people have started doing is when they come up and the needle's now on top of the fabric, you tend to just do that little roll and twist it back so that you untwist the twist that you made underneath. Okay, so if you get in the habit of every few stitches just rolling your needle a little bit in your hand, just like this. Here we go. Just like this. Okay, so it twisted downside. So when I come up, I just want to untwist it. Because when we go down, I don't have a camera underneath, but when you go down, you tend, trying to do this so that, okay, you go down, you take this and you kind of you just out of habit, do a little twist to come back up through your fabric. So once you come up, just undo that twist. Okay. My camera is backwards today and I don't understand this. All right, so you go down. When you're coming back up, you tend to just put a little twist on it to come back up. So when you go up, just take that twist out. It's just a habit that you have to do for a while to make it be natural, that you don't have to think about it anymore. But you want to untwist frequently because that's what causes your knots, and that's what causes your thread not to lay as nice. All right. Okay. Another thing that sometimes I will do is if I have really kinky thread that's been on a bobbin for a long time, or sometimes when you have thread on your thread drops and you pull just one strand off, it was a little tight, so it, you know, kind of tugging a little bit to get it off, and it curls up on you. You can take a damp sponge and run it over a damp, not a soppy wet, but a damp sponge. And that will take the kinks out. The other thing that you can do, and I don't know if you guys remember them, at one point in time, there were it was like an acrylic tube and it had a little spongy area on it. And you wrapped each end, there were two of them. You wrapped each end around a tube and you pulled a couple times and that would straighten your thread. Well, my friends, you don't need those little acrylic tubes. If you put the end of your floss, I'm going to do it with this, all 6 strands here, just so you can see it better. Okay. If you put the end of your floss around each fingertip, around your fingertips, and just go like this a couple times, that takes the kinks out. It works. It really, really works. So that's pretty much those kinds of tips of what you can do with your thread that will make your stitches a little bit neater. However, I only took 37 minutes for that one. I thought it would be longer. Maybe this video won't be as long as I think. So, hang on to your hats. We have a little bit more. Okay, we talked about that. Another thing, in an area that you're stitching, if it calls for back stitching, you want to do all your X's first. Okay, and then you want to back stitch. But do your X's first. Now, you don't have to save all your back stitching for the very end of the project. If I had to do that, I would never finish a thing. Because A, I don't really like to back stitch, and there's no way I'm going to save it to the end. But if I have finished a designated area that has back stitching in it, I will back stitch as I go. But I will complete all the X's in that area and then do the back stitching. Another thing you want to think about is if you have white right next to a dark color, what you want to do is stitch the lighter color first and then the dark color. So if you have white, just for discussion's sake, if you have white next to black, you want to stitch the white first and then the black. Because if you stitch the black first and then the white, there is the tendency for fuzzies from the black to get mixed in with the white and come up in your white areas. So stitch your lighter color first and then the darker color. That in itself also helps to improve your stitching. Dampen threads. So the last thing I want to talk about, and the reason I have the camera here, is to be mindful of the way you move about your piece, to be mindful of the way that you travel, because the way that you travel your thread affects how your stitches look. All right, so I'm going to try and show you that here, hopefully. Hopefully. Now, I just put one strand of floss in my needle. So I'm going to try and come in real close here so that you can see it. Right? So let me find, okay, find a place here where I'm not making you all seasick and myself crazy. Always camera adjustments. You guys know me. We always have something to do with getting things right. Okay. So I'm going to make my X. Okay. I don't know, two-handed stitching is not quite my friend today. And I sure don't know why this is backwards. It's making me a little disoriented. But, okay. So we're just going to stitch a few stitches here. Now, while I'm over here, I have one lone X down here. So I think I'm going to get that one while I'm here. Okay. So actually, I'm going to say no. I have one lone X up here. So I have just gone down in this hole. And I want to do an X that's right up here. Watch what this does to my thread. You see how that pulls? And if I do this half this way, and then cross it, do you see how on these other stitches, you can see that my hole is open, but on this one, this hole is closed, this hole is closed. So then I'm going to come back down here, say, and do these stitches. So you see how there it's leaving a bit, just a small, but a bit of an opening. Where this one, you seem to have a longer tail. So if I want to go up here and do a stitch, all right, what I would do on this X, because I want to go up here, is I would come up in the top of this X, go down in the bottom, so that when I move to the top of this X, I'm continuing to open this hole. And I have gone to the top of this X so that when I go down, I should have gotten maybe a little bit bigger piece of fabric here. I also am opening this hole. Okay. Let me try and show you on this Ada cloth a little bit better. I'm not liking this right hanger fabric. Okay. Now, hopefully I won't make you seasick. Okay. Backwards business. Okay, so let's get an X or two on here. So I want to do an X above. All right. So I'm going to go down here. And I want to catch this X up here. So I'm going to come up here. All right. Here we go. Do you see how that is covering the hole? All right. I came up with the wrong spot. Okay. Yeah, that's fine. All right. So now I'm going to do this X. See how that's covering the hole? Whereas if I had, for example, come up in the top, went down in the bottom, and on this X, come up in the top and down in the bottom. I don't get that elongated hole covering. So the whole bottom line to this is be mindful of how you move from place to place, because you want to keep it that you're always pulling back towards the X itself. Okay, so that this one, all right, I was moving up here. So my thread was being pulled from here to here, which caused this hole to not be open, covered up that opening. Again, that's what contributes to when you come up in a dirty hole, your thread or your needle could potentially pull some of this thread back up because this hole is not open. It's probably piercing this thread and pulling it along back to the top. Because you all know how if you have that teeny tiny little end on the back of your work and you accidentally catch it, and how sometimes you can pull that to the front and you need your snag nabbit to get rid of it. That's what will happen here. You will pull that to the front if you come up in those holes. Okay, so you have this long thread covering here, where in this one, where we went from this top to bottom and then top to bottom, we're pulling back towards the X and keeping that hole open for another thread to come through it. So you need to be mindful of well, you don't need to. It would help to be mindful of those. The same thing if you're going to a lower spot. Okay, so if I am stitching my X here and I want to go down here, sorry, I'm all backwards today on this camera. I don't know why it did that. Okay, here. I want to go down here. So I already went down in this hole. So if I come up in this hole, you see how it pulls the thread this way. And that hole is now not open. Okay. Whereas if I say this is my stitch now, and I want to go here. If you're traveling to the side, you can maybe get away with it a little easier. But if I want to go from here, let me do this. I'm going to go start my top X this way, hopefully. And then I'm going to come down, oh, sorry, here, because see, this was the hole I went down in. So I'm pulling back towards the X. I'm coming up in the bottom of this X to go down. So I'm keeping my holes open. So you probably have to experiment with that a little bit to kind of see it for yourself. I apologize with my camera being backwards. It just has me a bit fluffled. So those are things that I know of that will help to make your stitches neater. One more thing that you can do is use a laying tool. If you're working with 2 threads, you can railroad your stitches, and I think most of you know what railroading is. But that is when I don't have, let me see if I can get enough thread here together to show you that. Okay, railroading is when you come up and you have where am I here? You have 2 threads. I'm going to go down, so I'm going to take my needle, I'm going to put it between those 2 threads, and I'm going to pull it through that way, and now my stitches are going to lay side by side. I'm going to do the top stitch. I'm going to put my needle through the 2 stitches, down through the hole, and then my threads will lay side by side. Okay, that's railroading. The other thing that you can do is you could use a laying tool. And a laying tool, you would come up through your fabric, you would use the laying tool and lay it here to keep your threads side by side. You'd go down through your fabric, and then you just use that tool, and a lot of times I'll just use my thumb. You just use that tool to help keep your stitches, your threads side by side to go through the hole. Okay. And there are plenty of videos out there, I'm sure, for how to use a laying tool. But the whole idea of railroading and laying tools is to keep both strands of floss laying next to each other. Unlike, I lost that piece of thread, where I showed you those 2 threads that we didn't strip and they were all twisted on each other. If you keep them that way, then your stitches are going to look twisted on each other. Okay, so railroading your stitches or the use of a laying tool will help to prevent that. So that's my wealth of knowledge when it comes to, let me switch me back here. There we go. That's pretty much all of what I know about trying to keep stitches neater and have them look uniform and, yeah, the best that they can look. A lot of it is just patience and practice. It's just like I would love to do the sewing method and stitch in hand, and I have not done enough of it to develop a technique for it. And I, at this point, still don't like how my stitches look when I do that. So I continue to use either a hoop or a Q-snap and plug along, and it takes the length of time that it takes, even though the sewing method would probably be faster. But I personally have just not been able to perfect that to the point where I like it. Everybody else thinks it looks fine, but I don't like it. I'm my own worst enemy in more ways than one. So I choose not to use that method, and I keep doing as I have done for the last, okay, I'm not going to say how many years because you all know already. But this is my wealth of knowledge, that what I can share with you, what I have learned through the years of stitching and um, researching things and listening to other people of what they do to keep their stitches neater. And I just wanted to share it all with you so that You know, this community is all about sharing the wealth of knowledge. And most of you know that's what my channel is really all about. Yes, I do lives. Yes, I do Stitch with Me's. Yes, to all of that. But the whole bottom line is I just love to share with you what I know that can maybe help make things better for you. So I hope this has helped make things better for you and you have gained some knowledge out of this video. And with that, I am going to have to say, we're going to call it a wrap. We're going to call it a wrap. Have a wonderful rest of your week. Enjoy your stitching. And stitch what you love what you stitch. And remember, there are no rules in cross stitch, only the ones you make for yourself. So until next time, my friends, have a great rest of your week, and I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye for now.